Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 144. Life is like riding a bicycle. To keep your balance, you must keep moving. Albert Einstein.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Blackbox. Blackbox is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Blackbox, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Blackbox currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Blackbox is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Blackbox, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Blackbox takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. If you want access to filmmaking documentaries, feature films about filmmaking, interviews with some of the top screenwriters and filmmakers in Hollywood, as well as educational online courses all in one place, IFH TV is for you. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv. And today's show is also sponsored by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. If you want access to filmmaking documentaries, feature films about filmmaking, interviews with some of the top screenwriters and filmmakers in Hollywood, as well as educational online courses all in one place, IFH TV is for you. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.tv. So guys, today on the show, we've got author Reed Martin, who is the author of an amazing book I read a while ago called The Real Truth, Everything You Didn't Know You Needed to Know About Making an Independent Film. What Reed did is he went around and interviewed over 100 different independent filmmakers, very successful filmmakers, and just asked them, what were the mistakes you made? What are the pitfalls that you went through? And he wanted to kind of create a resource for filmmakers not to fall into those kind of debacles and lose money in the filmmaking process. So, of course, as you know, that's one of the reasons I even created Indie Film Hustle. So we are of two like minds without question. You know, in the book, he goes over equipment problems, shooting day snafus, post-production myths, theatrical distribution deal breakers, and a bunch of just other stuff that he go through, and even gives you a top 50 mistakes every filmmaker makes. So I wanted to get him on the show. I wanted to kind of really dig in and just milk as much information as he was willing to give us on this episode. So without any further ado, enjoy my conversation with Reed Martin. I'd like to welcome to the show Reed Martin. Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man. I always like to do the origin stories of my guests. So how did you get into the business and how did you get interested in filmmaking?
Well, I've always been a film buff. I've been able to go to the Cannes Film Festival in 1995 as a guest of the French Embassy Trade Office. Mm-hmm. I had entered an essay contest that they had posted up at Columbia, and I actually won that. I wrote about French cinema and its challenges of finding an audience, a modern audience in the United States.
Nice.
So then after grad school, I worked at 20th Century Fox Film in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So I worked in marketing there. Then I was director of marketing at producer Cary Woods' New York-based production company, Independent Pictures. Mm-hmm. And then I covered Sundance for USA Today. That was in 2005, and taught a course at NYU for 6 years from about 2003 to 2009. And during that time, I had the inspiration and wrote my first book, which is The Real Truth, Everything You Didn't Know You Need to Know About Making an Independent Film. And ever since then, I've been sort of out on the road, just sort of helping people realize their dreams of making their first or second film.
Now, what can you tell us a little bit about your experience making films? Have you made a film yet? Or I'm sure you have.
I have actually. Yeah. Well, I made a short.
Okay.
And the thing was, it was a very expensive short.
Yeah. Those aren't those the best type?
Exactly. Well, they may not be.
Tell me about it.
The thing is, it almost, you could almost make a feature for how much I made the short for. Door to door, it was like $45,000, which is quite a lot. And
yes.
The problem is, because I wasn't necessarily from the independent production side, I knew a lot of people in the independent film world, but I didn't have a crew of people who were coming up with me. I hadn't gone to film school, so I didn't really have a lot of people I could call on. And as a result, most of the people I hired to work on it were very extremely talented, but they all came from advertising and creating ads, and so they typically wanted their day rate. And so all of a sudden, if you're in a most favored nations situation, then you're paying sort of full freight for everybody, and that can be that's one challenge. The other one is that we shot on this very high-end, high-definition format, which can have its own problems because once you decide to shoot on a very high end, then everything has to be done sort of that way, and so that, as we can discuss today in the podcast, that can have implications for post. It can have implications for your production, and so it kind of boxes you into doing things, sort of the hard way or the expensive way, and so that was another issue. But really, having this experience of making this film, which had a very large cast as well, I went about doing it totally the wrong way, as many people do on the project. In fact, that's one of the exciting, fun parts about my book, The Real Truth, is that I interviewed all these famous filmmakers, 100 famous filmmakers that you know and admire and want to emulate. And I asked them, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you on a film set? And very often, many of their first films that we think of as their first films are actually not their first films, because their first films never saw the light of day, and they had to keep going and make another film that became their first film. So it's one of the reasons, having gone through this experience myself, which was really akin to Steve Buscemi and Living in Oblivion. Almost.
Oh, what a great movie that is!
I know, isn't it great? It really encapsulates the whole experience.
The grip with the screenplay in the back pocket is just brilliant.
It's not only the back pocket, but the way that it's folded over.
Yes, it's all wrapped up. Yeah, because it's in his back pocket.
I know, exactly. Perfect. I know, it's great. Every character was so indelible in that film. It's one of the reasons I wanted to write The Real Truth, because I had asked the producer, Ted Hope, who now works at Amazon, I had asked him way back when at the, I think it was at the IFFM, which I guess then became IFP. I said, what are all the things that can go wrong on a film set? And he said, it would take hours to explain, and it would fill the pages of the Manhattan phone directory. And so after I made this HD short that I made, I decided I would write a book that was actually as big as the Manhattan phone directory, or at least approaching it. It's 540 pages.
It's a pretty thick book.
Yeah, because there's just so many things. And so, about everything that would go wrong on a film set, but I didn't want people to take it from me, because I wasn't someone who anybody had heard of. So I asked all the famous filmmakers independent filmmakers I could speak to at leading film festivals in New York and Park City during Sundance, and I asked them to tell me their stories. And if something that I had gone through on my short extrapolated had ever happened to them, and in fact, the things that I included in the book were the things that happened to me and also happened to them. And to answer your question, about the experience of making your first film, we had all kinds of problems that no one had ever mentioned, like time code bubbles and bad sound and bad line readings, and we needed a ton of ADR. We had missing shots that we didn't shoot because we didn't storyboard. There were some issues with the HD video, which we can discuss. We had a backup hard drive that failed. It just went on. And one of the things that was the most surprising to me, which is something that I just never heard of, and there's a ton of these, which is that we had some kind of weird phantom reverb on some of the actors' voices, because we were shooting in a very large room. And so when you're shooting in a space that's that large, the actors' voices can come in with a bit of an echo on it, even if you have the boom right up to their faces. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is how if you're going to do a location scout and you find the perfect place, you have to actually, or you should, bring your sound engineer along with you to the scout, so that you can find out if there's some kind of issue, whether it's planes flying over every 5 minutes or whatever it is. But there can also be very subtle issues with sound that make a location unusable.
Oh yeah, without question. I mean, I had an anomaly happen with me once on a shot of film on actual 35 millimeter, and there was something wrong with the gate, and I got phasing in the film.
Oh, wow.
I literally got phasing, so there was like streaks of light coming off. Anytime there was a light, there was a streak that would go straight up, and it was just the gate. There was something wrong with the gate, and light was leaking in, and basically all that footage was. We kind of fixed it, but it was pretty much useless. So these are things that people don't talk about. That's why I love that.
It's not some kind of a Kubrick effect that you were going for?
No, I wish I could say yes, it was. But no, it was not a Kubrick effect. Though now thinking about it, yes, it was. No. But
or like Terrence Malick or something with all kinds of who has all the lens flares like
well, that would be yeah, no, but lens flares don't go up. They go side to side.
Okay,
It went up. It was very unpleasant. But yeah, things are like that. Like you were saying with the sound, like, like, oh, this is a great location. But if sound sucks, then you gotta, the thing is, and I find with production in general, and I know you talk a lot about this in the book, is that you got to think about the long game. You got to think about the workflow. You got to think about the path, because this one decision can the waves of that one decision can just affect so many things. And you have to have that mentality of thinking about things down the line, as opposed to just right what's in front of you. Does that make sense? Do you agree?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book is that you need a fundraising effort to fund the fundraising effort. You have to raise some money so that you can have this interval to go around and talk to people, because otherwise, you may not be able to sustain your effort of raising the funds. And to your point, with workflow, you have to make, if you're shooting on some kind of exotic new camera or some sort of high-end equipment, you need to test your workflow all the way to the end. You almost need to make a short film, a 1 minute short, or a 2 minute, a 30-second advertisement, or a YouTube video, whatever it is. You need to test your workflow all the way through post, all the way to the end, to make sure that you're not going to have some strange anomaly, as you pointed out, or some kind of thing that you just never would have thought of. Right at the end, when you get into post-production, where all the magic is supposed to happen, you can end up in a complete catastrophe.
Oh, and I've seen many of those in my day.
Right. I mean, it really is just the most collaborative of the arts. And the thing that people don't realize is that, I'm not saying this to be discouraging. I'm saying this is what the Real Truth focuses on, to help you, realize your dreams. And it's okay to have your head in the clouds as long as your feet are on the ground. But people just don't realize that sheer force of will, if you have the stamina and the drive of like a James Cameron or a Catherine Bigelow, that's not enough to carry the day, because there are so many technical issues and there's so many people who have to be operating at the top of their game. And very often it's just difficult to corral all of that. And also to foresee everything that you might run into. And
it's honestly a miracle when a movie's made. It's surely, I mean, for anybody who's been in the trenches, to get a full-blown movie made with everything hitting on all cylinders is an absolute miracle. It really is. Especially in the indie world, it's almost, I mean, it's just fascinating. When I see a good indie film that everything worked, the story worked, the cast worked, the lighting worked, the camera worked, the directing worked, it's such a rare thing.
I mean, it really can be. That's the thing. People would be much more forgiving of movies that they see. They wouldn't shrug their shoulders and say, or something like that. If they knew all of the effort and deprivation that was poured into that. Because it's very hard to even, it's as challenging as you just said, to even make a not so great independent film, let alone a stellar film.
Just a technically sound film. Yeah. Just making a technically sound film. Screw the acting, screw the writing, screw the directing. Just something that technically works. Yep. That's a miracle in today's world. It's really fascinating. And because I've been in post for over 20 years doing indie films, I from experience can tell you, it is a miracle sometimes, but filmmakers do definitely have to think about the whole process. And let me ask you, look, what are some of the troubles that filmmakers get into in post?
Well, that's the thing, to your point, a lot of people say, don't worry, we'll fix it in post.
I hate that.
About it in post. I mean, that's sort of a catchphrase that people hear, and it's reassuring, but what people may not know, and one of the things I discuss in The Real Truth, is that some things go wrong that they can't be fixed in post. Mm-hmm. Some things go wrong during production, but also things can happen in post that can go off the rails in post, and they may not be fixable. Not everything is fixable in post. And so an obvious one that people overlook, again, is that if they're shooting with very high definition cameras, or they get some kind of a deal on a free camera or a loaner camera or a test drive or something like that, say they're shooting in 6K, or even we'll push ahead for, next year or something like that. Say they have a chance to shoot in 8K if that becomes a thing.
That's lunacy. That's lunacy.
Widely available. So all of a sudden, you have this amazing camera and you're shooting in this ultra high definition format, but all of a sudden it causes big problems in post because the file sizes of the video are gigantic. So that means you need an editing bay. You may not be able to edit on a MacBook Pro. You may need some much higher end machine like a Dell Precision or, a Mac Pro Tower. So that's much more expensive. And, the file sizes are so large that you have storage issues now with your hard drives and your backup hard drives and your scratch hard drives. So if you were shooting in 2K or 4K, now you've got, double the amount of equipment and backups that you need on the post side. There's also, there's problems with sync sound. I think you mentioned that you had an issue with that at one point. So if you're shooting on if your sound equipment is not completely matched up to the camera you're using, then you can have an issue in post where you have to resync the sound and it can go out of sync. And so you get dialogue bleed, and that can be a whole headache. And so you can basically spend your entire post interval, which people typically under budget for. They don't think of, they don't give themselves a cushion. They may give themselves a cushion on the shooting, or they may give themselves a cushion on the budget for a crane day or for some special.
Oh, of course.
But they don't budget. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but in post they never. You always run out of money in post. Always.
Right, and that's typically why so many people need finishing funds. It's not because they need to film a shot that they weren't able to get. It's because they ate into their post, or they ate into their their remaining budget for other things, for licensing or for music, to just get the film shot. But everybody ends up needing finishing funds on some level, or another interval of fundraising, another Kickstarter round at the end to be able to finance the post part. I guess another recent problem that people are having in post is that they may choose to edit on Final Cut Pro X or FCP10, Final Cut Pro 10, whatever they're calling it. And not a lot of professional editors are using that anymore. A lot of folks who were using Final Cut Pro 7 have now switched to Premiere or Avid or whatever they came up with themselves. But all of these things, especially in post, people sort of push it to the back burner. But it's something that the line producer should be discussing early. It's something that the director and the producer should be discussing early. Absolutely.
And a post supervisor would be lovely to consult at some point along the way.
Not even at some point along the way. You should get a post supervisor. The post supervisor should be on day one.
Yes.
Post supervisor should be brought in. Some people are thinking like, well, I don't want to have to pay this person's day rate for them to sit around and do nothing. But that's not how it is. You should bring in the post supervisor way early so that they can get out ahead of the things that are going to cost you double and triple down the line. That's the other funny thing about post, is that a lot of people who think like, well, every time you try to do, cut corners or save money or save a nickel, you end up paying 10 times as much as it would have cost to do it the right way when the time comes around. And so, absolutely having your post supervisor on early as part of the main team is really crucial.
I always tell them, if they can't afford a post supervisor, at least consult one. Pay them a few hours, pay them a day to come in and set up the workflow for you, and then also be available for questions along the way at minimum, because if not, like you say, it will cost them down the line. I mean, it just will, without question.
Right, absolutely.
Now, if you were going to market or distribute an indie film in today's world, what would you do?
Well, the thing is about marketing independent films today, I mean, there's so many more opportunities than there used to be. I mean, people used to just sort of take their cans of film around with them, from place to place, or have screenings based on the topic of interest, where you might have screenings on army bases or whatever it was. But, today there's just an enormous number of platforms that you can get the word out. I mean, you can join up every film group on Facebook, and there are literally 90. I'm not kidding. Like,
there's hundreds. There's hundreds.
You can join all of those, and you can get the word out that way. There's obviously there's Twitter and stuff like that. And while that might be an echo chamber or a vacuum of just the person's friends, there are other ways to sort of create a splash. I mean, you can put something on Vimeo, you can put trailers on Facebook, you can possibly take snippets of your film and use them as kind of bumpers to help promote a certain topic. If there's an issue that your film addresses, so you can sort of use little trailers of your movie to help promote an issue oriented or something like that. The thing I would advise people, and one of the things I talk about in The Real Truth, is that hiring a publicist and paying them $5,000 or $10,000, that may or may not get you an article in a publication that would attract interest. That's not necessarily the best way to go, and you might use that $5,000 to buy targeted advertising. Again, on Facebook, that's something where you can get really micro targeted. Just the other thing is just to try to get to festivals, try to interest publications, online publications, or publications that you might not think of, which are covering a certain issue. If there's a certain issue that becomes top of mind in the national news, you might say, well, I have a film that actually discusses that issue, and you can reach out to managing editors who you can find in the staff box of any magazine that you look at, and look for the managing editor, and you can pitch to them and say, hey, this is a topic of interest. It's getting a lot of press. I happen to have made a film. We're available for interviews, and we can send you a copy of it, and you can get some traction there. Getting a mention in a major national magazine as the film that covers XYZ topic could be a springboard into generating more national interest.
And also, would you agree that in today's indie world, the filmmakers should not focus on trying to hit a mass market and focus more on a niche?
I think the niche audience is just where things are going. I think it's very hard to make an independent 4-quadrant, movie that's going to just attract everybody. I think even if you are, it really goes the other way. It's almost like Hollywood is making movies that are designed to appeal to the widest audience, but are being viewed by niche audiences, just because people have their interests, they have their binge watching shows, and they have their news feeds and things like that. And I think in many ways, while there's this cornucopia of content out there, people's blinders are on so that they really only focus on a certain number of topics of interest. So yes, I mean, if you're courting the exact perfect audience for your movie, then that may be the most efficient approach, definitely.
Now, and how about distribution? What's your feeling on distribution in today's world?
There's a myth that you can get, you can four-wall, that you can rent out a house. You might be able to rent out a house in your local theater in your hometown for a premiere for one night, but there's sort of an ongoing myth that you can, take your film that you could show on a 2K projector in the local AMC and say, okay, well, can I rent one of the houses in your multiplex and show my film? And that is kind of a myth of yesteryear. The problem is, there are so many name brand independent films out there that that are in the pipeline for distribution, that it's very hard for a theater or an exhibitor to take one of those films off and sort of kick them off and put up your independent film, even if you have the money to pay for the house to rent. So that's something that is that people should have a reality check on. At the same time, though, not every movie needs to be shown during the day. Obviously, if there's family fare that's showing, that's on a weekday, that's not necessarily something that is going to need to be up on the screens for the 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock show on a weekday. So that it is possible to and also because of digital exhibition now, it is possible to make fast changes and to possibly get an exhibition birth that way. But as far as distribution goes, there are companies like Distributor. Excuse me. There are companies that you can. Not a lot of people buy DVDs anymore in the traditional sales avenue that they used to, but you could sell DVDs. From a merch table. So if you have a free screening or a presentation of your documentary or of your film, and you have people come to it, you might have 20 or 30 or 100 people who leave the theater and they want to buy a copy of the film as a DVD, as a gift, or as a keepsake, or as a souvenir. And so even generating screenings like that might be an avenue to possibly selling copies of the movie and generating revenue that way.
Just always thinking outside the box, basically. In the game, the rules are changing so rapidly, almost daily now, that you have to kind of roll with the punches and just start thinking untraditionally.
Well, that's true. I mean, there are companies out there that can help you get your film converted to the right formats and digitized and put up on iTunes and these other places for money. So again, like
Distributors are a really great company. Really great company.
So that's one of the avenues that people can look into to getting set up on online and having and monetizing their films that way. But then again, there are all sorts of issues. Like if you had if you were making a low budget version of like Blackfish about the Tilikum, the orca whale, if you had something like that, a version of that, maybe it was about dolphins or whatever, dolphin training or something like that. If you had a lower budget version of that, you might reach out to the ASPCA or to PETA or something like that, and you could possibly partner with them, give them some clips. There might be a way to sort of cross promote or cross market your project with somebody, with an organization that's already established, that has a huge mailing list, that has a way to reach people who are very passionate and interested about your topic as well. And so that's a way to plug in and to reach an audience that you could possibly monetize, again, with a keepsake DVD, not selling the DVD as you used to, like, in a big box store or something, or in a bookstore, but just that people would buy it as a keepsake or a gift to people who are similarly passionate about your topic.
Very cool. Now, what would you suggest for filmmakers looking for financing today? Because everyone's always looking for money for their next projects. What do you have any suggestions for?
Well, for filmmakers looking for financing, that's really where everything starts. That's probably the most important question there is. And I have 2 chapters on financing, actually, in The Real Truth. And one of the things I wrote about in the book is that filmmakers often think erroneously that there's only one person who can finance their film. It's like this one relative or the one friend, and that person is going to be their miracle, and they're going to either finance the movie out of their ATM card right then and there, or that person is going to be a conduit to the quote unquote right people, that this person has a circle of friends or high net worth individuals who that person is going to be the bridge. And this isn't always the case. And I think people get discouraged because if it doesn't go well, if that person that they were counting on as the bridge to their financing doesn't really groove on being thought of as a pocket book like that, then they get discouraged and they think, okay, well, my film, it's not possible. My one miracle is not going to be possible. And that's actually not the case. There's a lot of different inflection points where aspiring filmmakers can get financing, and they just shouldn't put their eggs in one basket. They should expand the timeline that they think it's going to take to raise the money, because it often takes a lot longer than people think. But they should also think about other routes. I mean, yes, today there's Kickstarter, there's Indiegogo, there's even Patreon. There are ways for people to generate money from big audiences, but also, as I talk about in my book, you might go to the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. You might get the script accepted into some other program where it gets producers interested, and then they can help with the financing, or they can help attract a star who will, attract overseas, financing or some other money from other sources. And so a lot of movies that start out as screenplays in the Sundance program or short films, they get made, they get into a major festival, and a producer sees it at the festival and asks if there's enough material to expand the short into a feature film. Famously, Napoleon Dynamite started out as a short that was in a festival, and then producers said, hey, let's expand this. And then Whiplash also famously started out as a short film. I think it was that big scene in the music room that everybody remembers with J.K. Simmons freaking out. So, I mean, that was just a short film, just that bit. And so, having a calling card, or having a short that you can take around with people and say, here's what I'm thinking of doing. Here's essentially the vibe that we're going for. That can help with the finance effort. And one of the things I think people don't think about either, which is another one, is finding somebody who can storyboard, finding an aspiring artist who's out there who can storyboard the entire screenplay for a couple of $100 or even a couple of $1,000. It's worth paying for, so that you end up with this kind of with this graphic novel. So you have the graphic novel, and you go around to people, and it basically is represented all the shots that you're going to have in the film, and basically telling the story with with all the stencil and all that. And you basically can help people see your vision and see what this film is going to be realized. That's a lot more compelling than going to somebody and saying, hey, I'm an independent filmmaker, I have this script, will you read it? And I'm looking for money, and having your hand out. It's much more compelling to have a finished thing, like a finished short that you can show people and you can say, this is what we're going for. This is the vibe. This is the energy. We're going to expand it out. Don't you want to see what happens next? Or if you have this, very high end, very glossy, very professional. I'm not talking about using storyboard quick necessarily or doing it with stick figures. I'm talking about real, full on, polished comic, graphic novel quality. And then that's something that you can go around to people and you can show that. And I think that's a lot more compelling and it's certainly a much better approach than hoping that the one friend that you have who has access to capital is going to bust you a check for $300,000.
Right, exactly. Now, you were talking about attaching talent. How should independent filmmakers approach talent when they're trying to attach them to their project? This is another thing that I talk about all through The Real Truth because it's a tricky thing, attracting talent. I mean, for The Real Truth, I actually interviewed both Dylan Kidd, the writer-director, and Campbell Scott, who's a writer-director in his own right, who starred in Dylan's film Roger Dodger, which was actually one of Jesse Eisenberg's first starring roles. And so, Dylan Kidd at the time, who was an aspiring writer-director, was working all kinds of odd jobs around Manhattan. I think he was a home care attendant, and he was like a bouncer in a pool hall. I mean, he was trying to drum up interest for his script. And what happens? He runs into Dylan Kidd on the street. I'm sorry, Dylan Kidd runs into Campbell Scott on the street. He palms his screenplay on Campbell Scott, gets him to appear in the film, and Campbell Scott allows Dylan Kidd to write and direct it. Now, that's a great story, and everybody is so inspired when they hear that on panel discussions at festivals. However, the problem is everyone leaves hearing that story thinking that that's how it happens, or that that's how it's going to happen with them, or that they're going to run into somebody on the street and they're going to palm the script on them. And that's just not how it works. The problem is, somebody who's shopping for groceries at, Gristedes or in LA at Vons or something like that. They don't want to hear how some aspiring filmmaker is going to resurrect their career like Tarantino or something. Right. Them, hey, you're kind of washed up, aren't you? Like, I can totally get you back on top. Like, they just don't want to hear that. And they also don't want to have to carry around a screenplay with their groceries, in the checkout line, or have like 5 or 6 screenplays under their arm. So it's just a myth that people are delighted to hear, how passionate a fan you are, and that you've got the screenplay and you happen to have it in your backpack on you, or you have it in your car. Can I run out and get it? And the problem is, there's only one Dylan Kidd. He's the exception. It's just not how movies are made. And people just don't want to hear that. People actually get mad at me. They're like, no, that is how it happens. And they really push back on that because it kind of upsets their apple cart. It kind of breaks with their, how their dream is organized. And that's the thing. I didn't write The Real Truth coming from me personally. I interviewed filmmakers that you would know: Alexander Payne, Darren Aronofsky, Werner Herzog, Christopher Nolan, Ken Burns, Barbara Koppel, all these people who basically confirm what I'm saying, and then they tell you their stories. And that's why the book is telling you the truth. This is how it goes. So to get talent to appear in your film, you just have to go through regular channels. You have to go through the actors' agents, or you have to attend a festival, or better yet, get into a festival with a short or with your screenplay, and then try to court actors that way. Or you have to, have money in escrow that you can make a formal offer. If you go to an actor's agent and you say, we have, $100,000 in escrow, here's the bank statement, or we have $500,000 or however much it is, and we'd like your actor to appear on these days, that as an avenue will get your script read. But an even better, smarter approach, I think, to approaching talent is not looking for somebody who's been in a million independent films, or not looking for somebody who the actor has their heart set on, or who they, first, got excited about movies watching. Jennifer Lawrence, when she was just starting out, when Deborah Granick was casting and directing Winter's Bone, she cast Jennifer Lawrence, who had only been in 1 or 2 other small films before that, and she was not the star. Jennifer Lawrence was not the star. I mean, of course, now she's one of the biggest, actors there is ever, and probably has a $20 or a $25 million rate. But the thing is, the best way to approach talent is to approach the best talent that an individual filmmaker can have, and create the next star or the next Jennifer Lawrence or something like that, and cast the best actors that you can in your project, and not necessarily be wedded or tied to someone who is an established star or somebody who has been in other independent films that are similar to yours. Very, very, very good advice. Now, you also talk a lot about distribution deal breakers. What are some of those? Because there is a long history of distribution companies that are not on the up and up sometimes.
Well, I mean, there's that, but more often than not, it goes the other way. I mean, the aspiring first-time independent filmmakers, they've made so many sacrifices, and they've eaten Rice Krispies and water practically, or
right.
Whenever the classic independent filmmaker line, when they get asked would they like a beverage with whatever their lunch order, no, they're going to save $2 on their lunch order, but there's so much sacrifice that goes into making an independent film, and The Real Truth really covers a lot of that. But when it comes to distribution deal breakers, that's the shocking thing, is that they can get all the way to having a finished film, and they can be talking to distributors at a major festival, and then the whole thing falls apart. And one of the biggest ones that I discuss in the book is really music rights, because people will assume wrongly that they can load up their independent films with all of this moving, compelling music, and it really makes the movie powerful, and oh my gosh, it really cuts together well, it just cuts perfectly. And then they get to the distribution conversation, and none of the music has been cleared. They may or may not even have festival rights to the music, and so essentially independent films every year at festivals become this mini subprime mortgage crisis. I mean, it really is how it is. I mean, they could very well look to independent film as a precursor to that, because what happens is you've got an independent film that the filmmaker wants to sell for $500,000 or for $1 million or for $10 million or however much they're dreaming of selling it, but the film might have a $700,000 or $1 million or $1.5 million uncleared music budget. And it is wrong to assume that a distributor will just step in and make that go away or pony up the money from it. Typically what happens is even if you do get the film sold, the clearances and all that other stuff comes out of your advance or out of your entire payment. So all of the money that would have gone to the investors, all the money that would have gone to the filmmakers who are working on deferred budgets or who are hoping for points or upside, it all goes to clearing the music, and everybody ends up with nothing. Or the distributor just says, look, there's no way, it's too much, forget it, and they just walk away. A lot of times distributors just – there are other films who have done it the right way. There are so many films who have done things the way that they're supposed to do that they don't have to hassle and they don't have to – haggle with somebody who hasn't and who has all sorts of unpaid liabilities in their project. I mean, other distribution deal breakers are that they don't have the chain of title, they don't to the film, they don't have clearances for all of their actors and for all of their extras. That can be a problem. There can be issues. There can be legal issues in terms of if the documentary subject is portrayed in a poor light or something, that person may or may not sign off. So there are all sorts of issues that you can get into. And, these are things that you have to really talk about and discuss with your team up front. I don't want to give too many of them away because I want people to take a look at the real truth. But, those are just some that folks should think about ahead of time.
Now, let me ask you a question, though. Do you think in today's world, depending on the budget of the film, does it even make sense to go with a full-blown distribution company as opposed to self-distribution? Because if you make a movie for $50,000, $100,000, could you, if you're smart and build an audience and so on and so forth, distribute the movie yourself and be able to recoup your money? But definitely something under $50,000 in today's world, or go with a distributor, because on that kind of budget, I've seen so many times that they'll never see a dime ever. And even if you get these big deals that get signed at Sundance that are like, oh, they sold that movie for $1 million. I'm like, that's great, but they will never see another dime again. That's all they're ever going to see. So, which is not bad. Trust me, I wouldn't mind $1 million payday either. But in today's world, do you think, is it even worth going with a big distributor on a low budget indie, like anywhere from $50,000 below?
I mean, that's a great question that you bring up, because the issue is it may not even be because of financial shenanigans. People are assuming when they hear a question like that they're getting ripped off or they're getting hosed in some way, but that's just not how it works. I mean, distributors are taking a huge, huge risk, and they're ponying up the money for the film itself, and actually for guarantees for putting it out and distributing it. But the marketing can certainly, even on a larger budget film, can cost more than the film. If a distributor is going to spend, $8 or $9 or $10 million on marketing, they're only getting back half of that from the theater. So they may buy a film for $1 million for a minimum guarantee, and then which is also very high these days. A lot of times their minimum guarantees are also kind of a thing of the past. That's
unless you're Netflix or Amazon or Hulu.
Well, I mean,
different business model.
Different business model, but the classic minimum guarantee where the filmmaker and the producer and the financiers assume they're going to be made whole at a festival by getting a big Publishers Clearinghouse check. That is not necessarily how things go these days. More often than not, they'll get a promise for distribution and a certain level of marketing and guarantees for that, but they won't get, and then they'll have to sort of recoup the cost of the production from that. It's not like here's the money that it cost you to make the film, and then now we're going to release it. That's something that is very much in the rearview mirror going these days. Not in every case. Yes, you get the big headline grabbing, sales, but more often than not, minimum guarantees are very rare. And so the challenge can be that a distributor is putting up, say, $10 million for marketing or $5 million for marketing. They're only getting half of that back from the exhibitor. And so the reason that the filmmaker never sees any money is because either the film was too aggressively released, or the marketing was too aggressive, or the release approach was such that the distributor themselves may not recoup initially until it reaches ancillary, like home video or iTunes or these other platforms. So it's not always the case that going with a distributor is a way that you're not going to see a dime because you're being treated unfairly. It's just because of the economics of independent film are so challenging these days. Yes, to your question, self-distribution is a way that people absolutely at the $50 and the $100,000 range can definitely have a better shot. But I think the problem is most filmmakers want to see their film. They want to see their name on the marquee. They want to see their film in an actual theater. And so given the chance, I think 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, they're going to go with an actual distributor who can make that happen.
Right, but in today's world, I mean, not many distribution companies are putting out $50,000 or $100,000 movies theatrically. They're not. No, I mean, let's bump it up. Let's say it's 500,000. I think 500,000 or $1 million. I mean, a lot of people are making quality, amazing independent films in that range. That's kind of what we're talking about. On the low side, yeah, there really isn't a market for the Clerks or for the Blair Witch or for the Go Fish or these historical, iconic touchstones of the independent film world that were written about in the John Pearson book. Spike Mike. That book really covers that era. Those lower budgeted films that just like the darlings of the independent film world of yesteryear, those are much harder to release theatrically these days. Now, if you had any advice for a filmmaker just starting out in the business, what would it be? Well,
I don't want to discourage people. But one of the things that I was
just go do so basically do something else. Just do something else.
No, it's not something else. It's just to reframe their expectations. I once ran into a very famous filmmaker. I don't want to say who it was, but I ran into a famous filmmaker outside of the Strand bookstore in New York. And I said, "Do you have any advice for aspiring screenwriters?" And he said, "It's never too late to quit." I remember thinking to myself, "What a jerk! Like, that's what you're going to tell me?" And then he patted my shoulder twice and walked away. He didn't even say goodbye; just walked away. And I remember thinking, I remember actually telling this story to people, this guy is such a jerk. And I was, he could have said something nice, and he could have inspired me. He could have said, "Don't give up," and just keep going. And I went, I crawled over glass and all the things that he did to get there. But the problem, I think, now that I've been through it, and I've made an expensive short that had all kinds of problems, and I've written this book, The Real Truth, where I talked to 100 well-known independent filmmakers. The thing that I realized what I guess he was saying is that if you're getting your electricity shut off and your girlfriend is breaking up with you and all these other things are happening and it's all sort of going wrong, this is not part of the Mardi Gras. This is not, you hear these things that happen to people, like Kim Pierce talks about getting her phone cut off and having the student loan people calling all the time or sending letters. The thing is, and people laugh when they hear these stories of woe, about how they had to eat ramen noodles, or Tom Wartenberg had to donate blood for several.
Yes, so Robert Rodriguez did the medical experiments, right? Yeah,
exactly. When you hear these stories, they you get people chuckle and things like that. But the real issue is if that's happening to you, then you're not doing it right. Then you're not having the right approach. You should not follow your dream to the bottom of the ocean. You shouldn't have to, making an independent film, while it's one of the most challenging things you could ever undertake, it should not completely wreck your life and potentially wreck your life, forever if you're running up huge credit card bills that take years to pay off. If you're promising pay or play agreements to famous actors, which then the whole project falls through for whatever reason, and you're on the hook for, $100,000 payment for a movie that will never even get made. This is not something that someone can write you a note to the PE teacher to get you out of. Like, there are a lot of issues where you are making decisions about your life by trying to make an independent film, or even just trying to write a screenplay. I mean, writing a screenplay in the middle of the night for an hour a night can have a deleterious and degrading effect on interpersonal relationships.
Oh God, yes.
And that's something to consider, and something people have to be down for. And also, there's something people just have to be aware of. So what I tell people who are just starting out is, A, the financing is going to take twice as long as you think. B, you need a financing effort to finance the financing effort, because you can't sustain it on your own. You actually need some seed capital just to get things going and get things rolling. You need to, realize that there's not one person who's going to make things happen. There's not one person who's got a camera, one cinematographer who owns their own equipment, or one wealthy individual that you're friends with, or one family member who's going to make everything happen. You have to forget about that. There are all sorts of avenues. You may not have to spend any money. You can get accepted to a festival and attract producers. With a script, you can attract producers and get your film financed that way. The thing that the most important piece of this for the people who are starting out is to A, read a book. It doesn't have to be my book, but read a book that will tell you about the pitfalls you're about to encounter. And B, know that if a lot of things are going wrong and your whole life is falling apart, you might be Steve Buscemi and living in oblivion, and it might be funny, like, oh, I remember this happened to Nick Rev in the movie. Yes, I remember that this happened to Darren Aronofsky when he was talking about on a panel discussion about all the challenges he had with making Pi. But again, if it's happening to you, you may want to regroup or back up or just halt the whole thing and restart once you have things better organized, because you may not be approaching it in the right way.
I once worked with a filmmaker years ago, and he financed his movie, which was a $200,000 movie, by asking his in-laws for the money. And the movie did not do well. Let's just put it that way. And I'm like, my God, what kind of pressure on that relationship is that? I mean, like, it's one thing to take $200,000 of your own money, but imagine taking $200,000 of your in-laws' money and just flushing it down the toilet. I'm assuming Thanksgiving dinner is not going to be the same.
It's probably even worse than that, because what happens typically on low budget independent films is that, people need finishing funds, or they run out of money, or they budget it incorrectly, or something like that, or they want to add a certain sequence, or they want to have a crane day. So this friend of yours may not only have been the first $200,000, they may have gone back. Imagine if they have to go to the in-laws and say, listen, I know I just spent the $200,000, but I budgeted it wrong. So now to be able to get your 200 back, to be able to return the initial 200, I need another 200, or maybe I need another 400, or whatever it was that they budgeted incorrectly for. So, so it can, and again, you don't want to put, because at the end of the day, your film is the most important thing to some people, yes, but you don't want to put all of your interpersonal relationships at risk just to realize this vision. For a film that people may or may not ever watch. And you don't want to essentially be sitting alone at home with a Blu-ray of your movie, watching it by the flickering light of your
standard definition.
Your standard def.
Yes. Standard def TV that's on cinder blocks.
You have like a TV that has like rabbit ears, or has like it has the old timey antenna.
Yes, eating ramen noodles with ketchup in the fridge.
Right. So. Exactly. I mean, you don't want to end up like that. And people, the problem is at festivals and all these other things, people never hear those stories. And I was somebody who went to Cannes. I went to Sundance 3 times. You hear all these stories on the panels. You hear all these stories, which are inspirational. I went to, the American Film Market in LA, and I attended IFFM, and then, became the IFP. And I was, hobnobbing and meeting all these people, and I was so inspired by all the work. And, you always hear these great stories of people who persevered and who never quit, and they kept going. But what you don't hear are these just harrowing stories of people who, ended up with $30,000 in credit card debt, or who unfortunately mortgaged or leveraged all of their friends and family and ended up in kind of a pickle. And this is not people you've never heard of. This is people who have made it and whose first films are not their first films. The first films that you know about are actually their second or their third films. And so that's what I tried to capture in The Real Truth, so people can have a reality check and not approach things in a way that's going to be self-immolating. A lot of people have hobbies. They might be gardeners, or they might, build model ships or whatever it is. But a lot of people don't have hobbies or dreams or goals that have such a potentially devastating impact on their personal lives. And that's something that people really need to, I know you don't want to be a wet blanket or a Debbie Downer, but it's something that people really need to take more stock of.
Oh, I talk about that constantly. I always tell everybody as real as I can get it, because I was similar to you. You wrote your book. I started up Indie Film Hustle specifically to that, to give people real information about what it's really like out here, doing this. And it's not easy. And it's a long game. It's definitely not a short game by any stretch. And a lot of people fall into that whole lottery ticket mentality of like, I'm going to make a movie, get into Sundance, and Harvey Weinstein's going to write me a check for $5 million and the rest is history. And then I could just go off and go to the Oscars. Like, it doesn't work that way.
That's a great point that you made, Alex, because the thing is, a lot of people, and I actually thought this, I thought I was fairly sophisticated, but I thought if you can just make a low budget film, then you can end up with a 3-picture deal, this fairy tale 3-picture deal where you're set for life and you get to write, you get a bungalow on the lot. And
right. You have lunch with Spielberg. Right.
Exactly. But or not even that, or they just, somebody's going to cover your rent, and you'll have the 3 projects that you can do. You're going to follow this sort of Kevin Smith model where people are going to hand you rewrite jobs. Oh yeah, that's another one. Like, if you can just write a script, just write that first script, you can just get that one film finished, then you'll get all these screenwriting rewrite jobs for $100,000 a pop. I mean, that just does not. It's just not a thing anymore.
That's even worse than being a filmmaker. Like, screenwriters is actually tougher than being a filmmaker, because anyone can write a screenplay. It's very low cost of entry. To make a film is a very high cost of entry.
But one thing that people also don't consider is that a lot of their a lot of the well-known filmmakers that they admire, that they want to emulate, they're all doing TV these days. They're not.
Yep,
it's
where the money is.
Well, it's not just because the money is there, like the big money. They're doing it to make a living. I mean, people. Yeah. It's very tough to make a living at that. A lot of times people who are producing independent films, the director may become Colin Trevorrow or something like that, but the producer and everybody else who's worked on this project and helped make it a reality are not necessarily along for that ride. And so that's one thing that's very hard to take. The other thing is just that there's not, that the TV is really where a lot of people have to make their sort of daily rent money from something like that. And so it's not necessarily, the economics of independent film are such these days that it's very tough to imagine that you're just going to be a troubadour independent filmmaker who makes these low budget films and somehow earns enough back to make a living from that.
It is extremely difficult. That's why, and that's why I've been in post for the last 20 years. That post has basically been able for me to, and I also direct commercials and music videos, but those are those things that help supplement my habit.
A lot of the creativity, a lot of the risk taking in terms of story ideas and story arcs. I mean, ever since Breaking Bad and The Sopranos, TV is really where a lot of the creativity is happening. So there's also sort of a creative reason why people would want to migrate from independent film to episodic TV. But again, mostly it's just because if you write and direct an independent film once every 3 years and take it to Sundance and then sell it, for maybe even if you were able to sell it at Sundance, which only about a dozen films out of the 120 that are
if you're lucky, yeah.
If you do that once every 3 years, that's not enough to sustain your your meager lifestyle. It just isn't. So there's other, people are teaching. They're like you. They're doing other things. They might be editors. They might be working in post, or there's some other aspect of the creative industry. But it's not necessarily just from straight up independent filmmaking.
Now, what I always ask the same last 2 questions of all my guests. What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Gosh. Well, again, my whole goal with writing the independent film book, guide, textbook, whatever you want to call it, The Real Truth, everything you didn't know, everything you didn't know you need to know about making an independent film, is really designed to get out ahead of all of these roadblocks and pitfalls that people are going to run into. I mean, originally, the original title was actually Landmines on the Road to Sundance. Because
it's a great title. Actually, that's a really great title.
I know, that's a really great title. I had a great cover too, but the real truth was kind of a little more low key. But the thing that it takes you the longest to learn about this space, I think, is just that it's one of the things that's also a challenge is that there isn't really, like, you finish your screenplay and you type fade out. And that's just such an amazing, momentous moment because you did it. You've written a first draft or a second draft. And the thing is, confetti doesn't fall from the ceiling. That's the thing.
Right.
It's very hard to take the fact that, you might get into a festival. And that's amazing. That's a huge accomplishment. And there are other festivals in Sundance. Yes, there are a ton of festivals. But the thing is, it's like, again, your life does not change on that day. The same way, if you sell your film at a festival, your life, you're not suddenly like swimming in money because the money that the money that's promised for the sale of the film may be actually commitments for marketing and distribution. It's not a big Publishers Clearinghouse check. And so your life doesn't change then either, because also you have to have all the deliverable. There's a deliverable issue where you have to make sure that all of the sound and all the signed contracts and everything else, chain of title, has to be delivered to the distributor. All the music has to be cleared by you, not by them. All these things that have to happen before you'll get the disbursement from the check. So it's just incredibly long lead. And so the timelines that people set for themselves and say, well, if I can finish this film by September, then I'll everything will be great. I have enough budget. I have enough to live on until June, or however they do it. Their timelines are just way off. The timelines have to telescope dramatically because it might take you more than a year. It might take you 2 years. It might take you 3 years, actually. And so people have to expand that. And also just that at each step of the way where you expect the confetti to fall from the ceiling, nobody cares. That's the hard part. Yes, you might have a charmed life, and I'm not trying to be discouraging or anything like that. I'm just trying to give people a reality check, or just get them to get their expectations settled. That it's a very long road, and that you have to be the cheerleader for your own project, and you have to have a reservoir, like definitely a Werner Herzog level of commitment and stamina to get to the end of the finish line, because it's just much longer than people realize. And the thing I think that I've learned the hard way, and that I actually talk about relationships and the real truth, is that you just don't want to be losing girlfriends over this thing. You don't want to have you don't want to have, like, the people who are closest to you, have them sort of become casualties of this monomaniacal Ahab-like project to get your first or second film made. You have to have balance. You have to know when to put your laptop down. You have to know when to give it a break, give it a rest. You can't be up until 3 a.m. every night writing your screenplay. I mean, that's just the fastest way to being single your whole life. Basically, some people say, I'm keeping it real. This is what it takes. This is what it requires. This is the kind of commitment it requires. And if you can't, be on board with that, then you must not have faith in me. That's not actually the case. People in your life can have faith in you and they can believe in you, but you can't over leverage that and count on that they'll just roll with it forever, because it's very hard to find people who share your vision, whether they're part of your crew or part of your family. And so you have to take that into account. You can't just assume that everybody's along for the ride. And
as Mark Duplass says, the Calvary is not coming.
Well, tell me about what he said.
He basically had this amazing keynote on the South by Southwest like a couple years ago, and I'll put a link on it in the show notes for everyone to listen to. I did a whole article on it because it was as real of the truth as you can get, and he just basically said, "This is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to be. And if you think the Calvary's coming, they're not." It's not going to happen. You're not going to be saved at the last minute. No one's going to show up with a magic check or a magic distribution deal. It's not happening. And then he basically says, this is how you do. You make your first movie for $1,000. Go out, make a movie for $1,000. Get a bunch of your friends, get a camera. Doesn't have to be anything special. Go out and shoot a movie. Put it together. You can get it edited fairly cheaply on your own laptop. Put it together. See how it works. Then now you have a movie. Then you go in and you do another. And then when you're done with that movie, do another movie. Maybe make another movie for $1,000 or maybe even $2,000. And then do that. Then after you have 2 films, then you go after a TV star. And you talk to them and you're like, hey, and then he just goes into this whole map of how to do it. And it's doable, but it's not a short game. And it's not that lottery ticket mentality or the confetti falling from the ceiling. It's hard work that's going to take years to make happen. It's not something that's going to happen that first time out the gate. Very rarely does that happen. The Robert Rodriguez's of the world are I mean, I can count on one hand how many of those stories have happened in the last 20 years. But that's everything. That's anything. Everybody always hears these stories. And that's why I always try to debunk this myth that, like, you always hear about the lottery winner. You don't hear about the millions of lottery losers.
But to your point, Alex, it's not even that. I mean, the part of the fun of playing the lottery is just playing the lottery itself. So that itself is something. But the thing is, everyone points to Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez as the shorthand. Well, those guys, they made their films in, like, when was that, 1993 or something?
91 and 92.
Okay, yeah, so 91, 92, or Reservoir Dogs. I mean, that people are still pointing to something that's like a million years ago when there was a completely different, an independent film was in the middle of its heyday, and it was just, it was just an exciting, incredible time. And it was also just, like you said, with the Weinsteins, Harvey's going to step in. That was people who were at the top of their game. I mean, almost every independent film, it was almost like a bubble. It was like a housing bubble, because every independent film that came out was like, this incredible game-changing, hit. You had this interval where you have this string of
hit after hit after hit after
hit after hit, like every single thing. And even
Paranormal Activity, Paranormal Activity is another one like that. Again, that's 2 in 20 years. Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Well, I'm kind of old school sci-fi, so I think Blade Runner, Aliens, and the third one on that list, which I think is an important film that people should see, is the original On the Beach with Gregory Peck. I don't know if you've seen that. It's
I have not. No.
Old-timey science fiction, not the new remake version with Armando Sante. You can leave that one alone. But the original 1956 On the Beach with Gregory Peck. He plays a submarine commander. It's actually, I think it's an undervalued, undiscovered gem that I think I would recommend for people if they can find it on Netflix or even just buy it used on Amazon or however they come by it.
Very cool, man. So where can people find you?
Or buy it new on Amazon. Give the original author some money.
Yeah, all right.
That's the thing. What am I talking about buying used on Amazon? Buy things new on Amazon. Don't do the rebuying. That's the thing. With authors who have worked and poured their blood, sweat, and tears into things, authors don't get paid when you buy a used copy. So
very true.
If you can afford to spend another couple of bucks to buy a new copy, it helps. Every little bit helps. It helps the authors so they can write the next book. They're not trying to get wealthy. They're not trying to get rich. They just want to be able to write the next one.
Amen. So where can people find you?
Well, I'm at The Real Truth on Twitter, and I think that's probably the best way to hit me up. I'm absolutely open to answering questions. If anybody has any questions, they can just they can find me there, and I can offer whatever guidance I have. And also, they can post. They can actually post questions. I think actually Amazon has a comments section for The Real Truth, and you can post questions there, and we can have sort of an interaction in the authors section of that page. So that'd be happy to answer any questions that people might have, or advice or guidance or anything at all about that.
And I'll put links to your book and everything else on the show notes as well. So, Realman, thank you so much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. I'm really delighted to do it, and it's great to discuss these things. Again, I want to help people, definitely keep their feet on the ground where they're trying to make their first or second film.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Reed Martin. He has a lot of great insights. Obviously, you interview 100 very successful indie filmmakers, which is an oxymoron in general, no? I'm joking. We're here to be successful, people. We're here to be successful as independent filmmakers, and that's why we're doing all of this. God damn it. Anyway, after interviewing so many filmmakers, the book has a lot of great information in it about what to avoid in it. So definitely check it out. I'll leave that all in the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/144. That's indiefilmhustle.com/144. And don't forget to head over to freefilmbook.com. That's freefilmbook.com to download your free filmmaking audiobook from Audible. So that's it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you picked up some knowledge bombs, a couple nuggets of information that helps you along your path as an independent filmmaker. And just a quick update, I do have some very interesting stuff I'm working on coming up in the next few months. So definitely keep an eye out for some cool stuff coming from Indie Film Hustle and some other little surprises I have for you guys. So as always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.